let's contextualize you a little bit. Imagine somebody in your family was killed by a guerrilla fighter claiming some kind of political ideology. What if this person was forgiven and allowed to run for office? Or even simpler, what if they opened a supermarket in your area? Would you shop there? What happens if you don't shop there, right? I'm asking these impossible questions because I want to put a disclaimer up. Reconciliation is very complicated, and this presentation is not going to do it justice. Please go to that link and see what the people that actually know something about this are saying. Very quickly, it was a violent conflict for over 50 years between guerrilla fighters and the government of Colombia. Over 265,000 dead, 8.5 million victims, obviously extremely traumatic for the fabric of the country. There was a peace accord that was signed in 2016 between the government of Colombia and most of the guerrilla factions. Now, let's be very clear, it's between the government and the fighters, right? But where does that leave the people, right? And that's what reconciliation is. What are the wants of the people? Let's analyze some cases. It's possible that there's a family that lost their breadwinner. Well, what they lost was their socioeconomic status. So what they want is to not be poor, right? It's possible that a family lost their house. They were evicted. They had to leave a violent area. But maybe they just want to move on with their lives. Start fresh, clean slate. It's possible that there's a group of people that have lost absolutely nothing, and yet they want justice, right? The point here is that this isn't a logic-based problem. This is an emotional problem, which is extremely difficult to diagnose. But that's what we're trying to do with the Program of Alliances for Reconciliation. It's ACDI Evoca's biggest project in Colombia. And we're trying to create social and economic programs around reconciliation. What does that mean? If somebody wants to do a project to target a specific condition in a specific location, we'll work with them to create something specifically for those people, right? I'm going to focus on the decido ser approach. I decide to be. Decido ser, part of reconciliation, right? It's a psychosocial framework that's being utilized in order to try to address the theory of change. That means, what is the sustainable change that we're trying to introduce in this specific country, right? So basically, there's experts that will analyze a community and say, I think if we use these actions, then we can see a change in perceptions, attitudes, and behaviors. That's what we're trying to change, right? What do they look like? It might be something like who is excluded from society and who is doing the excluding. We might talk about family. We might talk about who I am and my personal sacrifice towards the greater good of reconciliation, right? So these might be just conversations. It might just be like a conversation in a group. It might be something kinesthetic, like, for example, musical chairs. We have to do whatever we need to do in order to try to get to the underlying emotions, and that's extremely difficult, as you might imagine. There's some data questions that we can formulate. Are we choosing the right decido ser actions for this specific community? Is there something more that we could be doing, right? What can we improve? So there's a pre-post survey that we give to most of the people that we work with. It's a little bit complicated because we don't apply the decido ser psychosocial framework to everybody that we work with. And at the same time, there are some people that do have it that we don't know about. A little bit of an interesting problem there. But of course, the government of Colombia is doing work. There's the public context, radio, television, social interactions. There's a lot going on, right? But if we take those 16 questions in those surveys, we're not interested in the questions. What we're interested in is the dimensions that they respond to, right? The empathy, the security, prejudice. These are the concepts that we're looking to work with. So if we do post minus pre, we get a difference. Right now, this starts looking a little bit more like a data problem that we feel comfortable with. We add in there a little bit of personal information, a little bit of information of the local context, and now this looks like something that we can solve for. Two options. We can either use as a dependent variable the post, which we're trying to say we want to maximize the post score. It doesn't matter what your current perception is. We want to basically just get you as high as possible. Or we could model around the diff, the lift, right? So say, I prefer if somebody 1 goes to 3 on a specific dimension, than if a 4 goes to 5, right? That's a bigger change, right? So 2 different approaches. We're testing with both. It seems like we're having better results for our models, modeling around the lift. And of course, the purpose is what we're trying to do. We're trying to maximize our interventions. We can't control anybody else, but we can control what we do to help the reconciliation efforts. I'm going to jump to my conclusion. What we're trying to do is we're trying to build a predictive model where if you feed in the information about a specific community, who lives there, what the history of violence, what the demilitarization framework looks like, well, maybe we can figure out what are the best decido-said actions that we can apply for that region. We can also, and this one is important, we can try to measure the pre-post lift, predict it, and that'll help us prioritize certain areas so that we can focus on the interventions that we can really make a big difference on. And, of course, understanding the decision underpinning, right? So this is the important feedback that we can give to the psychosocial team. If they think that an intervention was supposed to work and it doesn't, well, we can use, for example, something like Lyme to try to understand why did this specific behavior not work the way that we thought, right? Some of the problems that we've been having so far, I just want to say we are working on this model. We just need to get a little bit more data. But one of the problems that we were having was the concept of tendency to the mean. Just very, very quickly, what that means is the pre and post consist of, for every question, you can answer a score from 1 to 5. Well, if you answered one of the questions 5, you can't go above 5, right? You can only go below 5. So what that means is when you take the mean of the people that answered a question with 5, necessarily you're going to go down. Likewise, if you started low, you're going to go high. So that creates this kind of trapezoidal shape in which, you know, perhaps we just have to be aware that this is happening in order to properly evaluate the data and results. You take a look at the dimensions. So this is the raw data just broken up by dimension. If we add in the trapezoids, you can see that for most of the dimensions, we are beating the trapezoid, right? Our data is going above the trapezoid, with the exception of trust and security, right? And security is an interesting case. We'll touch on that one later. Something else that we did early on in the exploratory process was we just tried to understand through linear regression what each specific coefficient for every one of the independent variables that we were using looked like. So we had 7 dimensions, so 7 models. And if we take those coefficients and we put them into a chart, so now we have 7 charts with coefficients on them, we decided to take this one step further and we broke it down so that we actually have the coefficients as independent charts with 7 models per chart to understand this specific coefficient affects these models in this way. Is it significant? Is it not? Does it go up? Does it go down? Just a broad area. I don't expect you guys to read this. These are this is the results of one of the models. I want to focus on one of these. So, utilizo estrategia propia. I used my own strategy. So that means people were not using the decido ser approach, they were using their own. You can see that most of the coefficients are negative, right? So since we're modeling against the post, that means that there's an inversely proportional relationship. That means it is better to use the decido ser approach, with the exception of one dimension, security. And as you might imagine, security is an extremely complicated dimension to work with. Government of Colombia is taking a lead on that. We are not. So it's kind of good to have a little bit of validation to say, for all of the areas where we are working, it is better to use the decido ser approach than anything else. And this is feedback that we can provide to our partners, right? We were taking a look at the variable importance. This is an early random forest model that we were creating. You can see that the variable importance of pre is by far overshadowing everybody else. So there's 2 things that we can do. We can quit and say, well, people don't change their mind. Pre is equal to post. You know, let's go have a pint. Or you can say, well, yeah, that is true. But that, you know what, in a way that I would expect that, because we know that people don't want to change their minds. God knows I don't. And especially when we're talking about emotion, there's an emotional momentum that we have to overcome. So we are working with extremely thin margins, right? And it's important to keep that information in the back of our minds. But that doesn't mean that what we're doing is useless. Let's take a look. These 4 actions seem to be highly important in determining the result. These 4 ones down there, maybe not so much. And that's what's interesting. Why are these actions not working? The psychosocial team thinks that they should be working. Why are they not? Are they simply wrong? Are we not applying the techniques correctly, which is a training issue? Perhaps we're giving these techniques to people that don't respond to them. So this is feedback that we can also give our psychosocial team in order to, basically improve everybody's reconciliation efforts as much as possible. So this is just a little of what we have been doing, and R is, of course, central to everything. If you guys would like to give us any questions or recommendations, please scan this QR code, and you'll send me an email. Thank you very much.